good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. The title of today's show is Jerk Radar. And my guest is Steve McCrea. Say it again for me.
Steve McCrea.
Steve McCrea. And he's written a book called Jerk Radar. And we will be talking about that and other things that may come up in our conversation. I was away for a while, and I was in Cuba for 10 days. And I'd like to talk about Cuba, but I'm not prepared because Steve's here. We'll talk about what he wants to talk about, and we'll talk about Cuba next time. But as you can see, we opened with a banner of Che Guevara. And in Cuba, Che Guevara is the hero, and everywhere you look, there's banners and posters and whatever. And he is the primo revolutionary. I guess he's held in very high esteem in a lot of countries around the world, and including my country and including me. On May Day, early that morning, there was 1 million Cubans marching on the Avenue of Presidents to celebrate May Day. Wow. And I was in that crowd. It was just exciting and exhilarating. So more about that later on in the future show. But let's go on with what tonight's show is about. Now, for you first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is that we've decided to talk about. And we have a lot of stuff beyond Jerk Radar that we'll be talking about. And as you viewers out there know, the show usually goes in two major segments. The first segment is what I called the Who Are You segment, or the bio segment, where I talk to my guest, I talk to Steve about who he is, and so you can have a better idea where he's coming from when you hear his views and opinions and thoughts about whatever it is we're talking about. I can tell just by looking at you for a few minutes, you're very interesting. So we'll learn more about that in the first half.
Good.
So if I ask a question that you don't want to answer, you can just say get lost, or I don't want to answer that.
Very well.
And if I would ask your best friend, who is Steve McCrea, what would your best friend say?
Well, that's a good question. I think that I am seen differently by different people, but I think things that probably people would say in general about me were that I'm a...
Pick a best friend.
Okay,
and be
a
him.
particular best friend.
And be him or her.
All right, that sounds good. Steve is a very smart guy. He observes a lot of things that other people don't see, and is willing to speak about them. Some people find that a very appealing quality. Some people find it a little bit off-putting, because some people are, I suppose you could say, less dedicated to the truth than others. He's a very kind-hearted person, generally pretty diplomatic, but he kind of gets to the core of things, and doesn't mess around a lot with social mythology.
Yeah, I like you even more now.
Well, thank you.
Besides your nice smile, yeah, you're going to be interesting to visit with, yeah. So how did you find out about me, me about you?
I believe we met at a meeting of, was it the Rethinking Psychiatry group?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I'm kind of old, you know, with the white hair.
That's right. That was at, at that video presentation.
Yes, I remember now. Thank you for referring.
They were talking about, it was about the woman who was talking about her recovery from bipolar disorder and how she viewed that as being a very different thing than what she'd been told by the psychiatric profession.
How was it you chose to be at that particular meeting?
I have a long history of, I'm a mental health professional myself, or became one kind of over time, and although interestingly I wasn't trained initially as a mental health professional. I was trained, my bachelor's degree is in chemistry, and then I have a master's in education. And so I sort of came into mental health treatment through the back door. I actually started working at Parents Anonymous on their parent helpline because of my own kind of observations about parenting. I wanted to help parents. And that led me into a teen mom's home and then other mental health kind of things. So I didn't really have the same kind of standard training a lot of people had in mental health. And I think it's given me, again, this outside perspective. So I've been, you know, critic maybe isn't the right word, but I've been a creative element in the world of mental health all along, and kind of like to push the mental health world to, you know, do the best job that they can. And so I've had some real concerns about where things have been going in the mental health industry, and this this group, Rethink Psychiatry, is kind of about getting back to looking at what's helpful to the person receiving the services rather than what the therapist or psychiatrist thinks is wrong with you.
We're getting way ahead of the game here. Let's go back to the bio stuff. You're deucedly interesting, yeah. So let's go to my cheat sheet, okay?
Okay.
And your full name is Steve, middle name what?
Stephen Thomas
Stephen
McCrea.
Thomas McCrea. Anything significant about your name?
Let me see. What about my name? Well, obviously, McCrea is an Irish name. All our kids have Irish first names, Patrick, Sean, and Kevin. My wife is more Scottish English than Irish, but we have a lot of Celtic kind of roots.
In Dublin's fair city, where girls are so pretty.
Yes,
I'm
a big
Irish
fan of Irish folk music. In fact, I occasionally drop by an Irish bar and have a pint or two and sing ballads with the band if I can.
Oh, wonderful. What a wonderful spirit. And when and where were you born?
I was born in Pittsburgh, PA.
Pittsburgh, PA.
Yep, grew up in most of my life in Philadelphia, starting about the age of 4.
Mm-hmm.
So I have kind of an East Coast cultural background, but I've lived a lot of other places and sort of tend to adapt to the location that I'm in. Though I do find, interestingly, that I still retain certain East Coast characteristics, like I like to be on time for things. And in Portland, you know, meetings don't start on time. A 9 o'clock meeting does not start at 9 o'clock.
And what year was that you were born in?
I was born 1958.
58.
Right.
Okay.
And moved to Philly in 62, and then we headed out here. My wife and I just got married. We headed out to South Dakota in 1980. That would have been 83, and then we headed out here in 85.
South Dakota. Why South Dakota?
Why South Dakota? That's a really good question. We asked ourselves that after we got there. I had a job in South Dakota. I had just got out of teaching school, and there were no jobs around the Philadelphia area. And I had a job opportunity out there, and you know, I'm kind of inclined to believe that sometimes, you know, the hand of Providence guides you in a certain direction, and you kind of want to go there. So I was like, South Dakota, why not? So we went to South Dakota. Lived there for 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a religious preference, or is that a fair question?
Oh, I can answer that, sure. I was raised mostly Episcopalian. My dad was a recovering Catholic.
Me too.
But I actually became pretty much a religious eclectic. I studied, my dad kind of started getting me into Eastern religions toward the end of high school, and I studied Buddhism in college, and I found that to be very agreeable to me. A lot of the things that that the Buddhists believe in make a lot of sense to me. So that's kind of a core belief. My mother also grew up in a Quaker town, and even though I never went to Quaker meeting until I was in my 40s, I think, I grew up with a lot of Quaker values, which I think sometimes makes going to a regular Christian church a little bit of a challenge for me, because one of the core Quaker beliefs is you don't have somebody else tell you what God thinks, right? If you want to know what God thinks, you ask him yourself, right? And then the other piece is, it's not for me to tell you what to believe. I'm here to reflect, you know, God's light through me to you. Mm-hmm. But I need to worry more about what I need to be doing rather than what you need to be doing. Mm-hmm. And I found that and Buddhism, interestingly, kind of mesh together really well for me.
What is God?
What is God? That's a really good question. I think
only because of what you've said so far about Eastern religions and all that.
I prefer to speak of divinity. I think divinity is that which we do not understand, that power or whatever, you know, organizing force of the universe that is beyond our direct ability to apprehend. Science spends a lot of time studying the physical universe and what's going on and all the rules of interaction between things, and I think that divinity is kind of what transcends that, and it's pretty mysterious.
Why that word, divinity, describing what you're talking about?
Well, because I think it encompasses more. If you say God,
Divine,
I think it gives a particular sort of, you know, anthropomorphized version of this old guy with long hair and a beard saying, "You shall not do this," or "You must do that." I don't really relate to it that way. But it's interesting when you look into some of the 20th century physicists who were very much not religious people when they started out. Some of them kind of found religion as they went along because they got to looking at you know, particle physics and found, for example, when they looked at the uncertainty principle, that you can't actually tell where something is and where it's going at the same time, or quantum mechanics, where they find that a particle can be in one place and then move to another place without ever having occupied the space in between. So they came up with these real dilemmas of things that couldn't really be explained directly by the laws of physics, you know, and they kind of realized that physics maybe had some limitations to it.
And there's also the human capacity for being able to appreciate any and all things, this cortex that we presume to have mastery over every and every damn thing.
Yeah.
But I'm interviewing you, not me.
But who runs the cortex?
Yeah.
Don, that's the question.
Yeah.
Who's in charge of running that cortex?
Mm-hmm.
That's the unanswered question.
Would you characterize yourself as being a-religious, or agnostic, or atheistic, or?
I would say that I am a spiritual person. I don't know that I am not a big fan of organized religion in any particular form.
What is spiritual?
I think it's what I'm talking about, a belief that there are things that extend beyond the observable universe, that we essentially are beings who occupy a body rather than the function of a body. We're not the result of our brains. We are the ones kind of driving the car, you know.
You did answer that, but you gave me a briefer explanation now, so thank you. Your formal education, you talked about that for a bit with your bachelor's and then master's in education. And you have a partner, or a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend?
I've been married for, my wife's going to kill me, I can't remember exactly how long. We were married in 1983, so that would be 29 years coming up next month.
29 years?
Correct, 29 years.
A long time.
Yep. I have 3 boys. My oldest is 28, and I have a 22-year-old and a 16-year-old.
A
23-year-old and a 16-year-old.
Yeah. And how old is the youngest one?
16.
16.
Yeah. And a granddaughter, who is coming up on 2 in June.
Is your wife going to see this video when we're done?
I hope so.
You want to tell her something? Yeah. Look into that camera over there and say something to her.
Which camera? That one?
Number 3.
Hey, hi, Ginny. Hope you're watching. Hope you're enjoying it. Thanks for being there.
Okay, and there's a question about your political persuasion. Fair. How do you see yourself on the political continuum, left or right or center or what?
Interestingly, I'm kind of in different places depending on the issue. I tend to be pretty more left. In fact, sometimes I'm way left of left. But sometimes I think I'm so radical that, you know, we have left and right spectrum out here, and I'm off here. I'm going in a different direction, away from left and right. I'm in another dimension politically than most people.
I think when I ask the question, in the back of my mind is social responsibility. And left and right and on the political continuum.
I think you should be able to tell from the nature of my book that I believe that we are all responsible for each other. And you know, kind of goes back to those Quaker values I was talking about. You know, one of what I learned as being real Christian values was, you know, that you love your neighbor and you love your enemy, and that you care about people and you try to make the world a better place. a lot of people who call themselves Christians don't seem to adhere to that. And the other one being, that judge not that ye be not judged, that you don't make judgments about other people. Other people, you try to understand where they're coming from, why they're doing what they're doing. That seems to be a foreign concept to some people who seem to have read that same Bible that I read when I was a kid.
Probably my favorite word in the English language is why, and I'm tempted to go with a why, but we could go on forever whenever you and I are chatting about this kind of thing. But I want to get to through my bio segment so we can get to the book and what the book is about.
Okay.
How about memberships in political, social, or civic organizations that would be of interest to our viewers?
Well, we already talked about rethinking psychiatry.
Yeah.
You may want to come back to that one a little later.
Sure.
I am also an advisor for the Oregon Foster Youth Connection, which we haven't talked about my work, but I work with foster kids and their families in juvenile court. And I ran into a wonderful person who would be really fun for you to have on, named Pamela Butler, who is a foster care survivor herself. She's about 28, 29 years old now.
Let's talk about that after, okay?
She heads up this organization called the Oregon Foster Youth Connection that gets foster children together to, first of all, talk to people about what it's like to be in foster care, and also they do legislative advocacy. And I find that a very valuable group, and really want to support them any way I can. That's probably mostly what I am hooked up with. Well, of course, I'm also part of the domestic violence online community, which I talk about in the book, that supports domestic abuse survivors.
Okay. Yeah, any persons from the past or alive today that you particularly admire or look up to? Any names come to mind?
My wife's grandmother,
Really?
Louise, yes.
Yeah.
She was truly an amazing person and really put together that, the Christian energy I was talking about. She was a Quaker. She was raised a Quaker. And I still remember, and I only saw her probably, I don't know, a dozen times or something, a little more than that in my life.
Your wife's grandmother?
My wife's grandmother. But she was such an amazing person. When I met her the first time, she's just like, Steve, it's you. Oh, I'm so glad to meet you. And you just feel this energy of love coming out of her, this acceptance, this just, radical acceptance, I would say, that she really cared about you, even though she didn't know who I was. The fact that I was connected to her granddaughter was enough for her. She was just going to envelop me with love. She was a wonderful person. I wish I could be as loving as she is. She's a great model.
I think of the term spiritual as you're talking about her.
Exactly. That's what I mean by spiritual.
Yeah.
She was truly spiritual. She knew why she was on this earth. I could tell you some stories, but I won't get into that.
Okay. So, talk a little more about what you're doing in your work life.
Okay. I work for the CASA program, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. CASAs are volunteers who we recruit, train, supervise, and they go into families where there's been abuse or neglect allegations, and they are there to protect the kids, to make sure that they're safe while they're in foster care, and to try to get them out of the foster system as fast as possible. Because we know from statistics and experience that kids who grow up in foster care have really bad outcomes compared to the average. So we want them either to go back to their family in a repaired state, or to another family that can care for them permanently as soon as they can.
What a job.
It's a great job, actually. I've been doing this for 15 years. What I love, there's two things I love about this job. First off, foster kids are possibly the most vulnerable population in the country. They have no power. They really need somebody to speak up for them, and so it feels like there's a real opportunity to make significant change in these kids' lives, and sometimes, I'm telling you, it really changes their life when we intervene. The other thing that's really great about this job is to see the volunteers, the transformation that they go through from the training to starting the work to completing the work. it is such a tremendous education for them about the world, about foster care, about themselves.
And what's important.
Yes, you just see tremendous growth in these people, and they're just the best people in the world that want to do this for the most part. Just some of the best people I know are CASA volunteers.
Some people might think that people who do the kind of work that you do would end up depressed a lot because of the kinds of populations they're dealing with. How come you don't end up depressed? And
well, how do you know I don't?
You're bad. I love it.
I had to say that. To me, the world is kind of a mess, you know, and it's depressing anyway. It feels better to be able to do something about it. It feels better to be able to intervene and say, in this case, I made a difference for this person. What I find depressing is looking at a big wall of stuff and saying, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to sit back and watch my TV and just let the world go by. That's depressing. So it keeps me from being depressed to know that I can still have an impact and make the world a better place.
And sometimes I wonder, because I'm like you in that regard, and if I weren't so perceptive or so sensitive or so how I am, then I wouldn't feel as much as I do about those conditions of humanity around the world, and not just in our country too. But then with what I'm given, I wouldn't want to give up that sensitivity.
No, me either. It's actually interesting you say that, because I read an article that had a big impact on me a few weeks back that was talking about the people who get diagnosed with mental illness. And this guy identified a scale of authoritarianism, like how willing are you to follow the directions of somebody else because they happen to be an authority. And he found that the less likely the person is to just follow along with the prescribed path, the more likely they're going to be diagnosed mentally ill. So I think that people who have that extra sensitivity, that are able to kind of step outside of the cultural mythology and say, why are we doing this? That those people you know, have a tremendous opportunity to see things differently, and they're the people who really make change, but they're also the people that get identified in our culture as troublemakers, and the kind of people that we need to push down and keep under wraps.
I am so proud to be a troublemaker.
Me too.
That's why we had the opening with Che Guevara, who was one of my primary heroes in the world.
There was a great, I think it was Martin Luther King quote that he said something about that he prided himself on being one of the creatively maladjusted.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the exact quote.
Yeah, but
fantastic.
I love that.
What do you think of Cornel West?
I don't really know that much about Cornel West. I know what he looks like. He comes to mind
right now, and
I haven't really studied his
He's
works.
got that kind of a thinking about him, a kind of way of being. And I just finished reading a long piece on the internet by Cornel West. But I'm just taking it away from what you're talking about.
Have you read anything by Hurricane Carter?
No.
He's another one that's really
way
outside the box kind of thinker. Yeah, but he was you know, he was jailed for 20 years or so for a crime he didn't commit.
Reuben Hurricane Carter,
right? But I just accidentally ran across some of his stuff when I was sitting in a doctor's office. I read across an article by him, and he's a very deep guy. He's talking about, he actually said that in a way what happened to him was the best thing that ever happened to him, even though it was horrible. He said, because it woke me up. He said, if that hadn't happened to me, I'd have just been another dumb black kid, got into drugs, probably got myself shot up, you know. But this really helped me see kind of what really mattered in life. And he said, it really woke me up. He said, most people around you were asleep. And part of our job here is to wake up as many of them as we can. And I really like that. That's kind of feeling like what I like to do, to wake those people up.
How do you see the mainstream media? Is it left, right, center, or what for the most part?
Oh, well, it's gone further and further right as the years have gone by, to me, I think. And again, I want to perhaps distinguish, I think there's a different axis here that we're talking about. What they've really gone is not necessarily more right, but more corporate. Because there's a lot of people who were conservatives back in the the 60s and early 70s that I had respect for them. I didn't necessarily agree with everything that they were saying, but they had principles. They were doing things because that's what made sense to them. I see we've gotten a lot further away from that, and now what we call the right is really more a different dynamic. It's more about marketing and establishing control of the market, of the media, and of people's consciousness and awareness. That's the thing that I find disturbing, and I see it happening both in the Democratic and the Republican parties. It becomes more about what's going to win you the next election, and more what's going to make a good image, rather than what's actually going to be good for the country.
So parties are subordinate to the real powers,
Exactly.
which is willing to eat the super rich and
large corporate interests, I think, are behind most
monopoly
of
cooperatives. The economic interests
it.
number one priority for so much of the movers and shakers of our country,
Exactly.
rather than social responsibility.
And part of that is because of the way we do elections, the importance of media in elections and having to buy media time, and they need money, and we're going to get the money, especially with this recent Supreme Court decision about not being able to limit corporate contributions. It's really scary that where they're going to get the money is those are the people that they're going to be beholden to, especially if they're focused, like I said, on getting elected again. They have to take care of their funders.
They're working under that paradigm, a monopoly capital. I was skewing off to one side here. We can go on forever and ever just chatting with you. Yeah, good. That's what's important now. So much for who we are. So let's take a minute break, and then we'll come back and talk about Jerk Radar and other things. Put up some panels here so we can take a break.
I'd love to have some more. All right, looks like we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals like my guest tonight, Steve. And about the topic of the show, Jerk Radar, and whatever else it is we will stumble across in our conversation. I'm just having a good time. Me too.
We need to have 3 hours instead of one.
Oh, absolutely. This is fun.
So let's start the second half in Jerk Radar. I got a few questions that you sent me that you've used before, and then I had my own questions here. But I'll start with a few, and then we can just go where it feels good to go.
Okay.
What's a jerk? Okay.
Well, for purposes of our book, a jerk is a person who is primarily concerned with themselves. The one thing that's sort of odd about this is I'm not a big person into labeling people. I really don't believe that labeling people is good. We should really be labeling behavior rather than human beings. So I don't believe that there are really people who are just inherently jerky. But there's a range of jerky behavior that really is centered around the idea that I'm more important than you, what I need is more important than what you need, and that if you don't provide what I need, it's okay for me to punish you. So a jerk is a person who subscribes to that basic belief system.
I'm glad you said what you did, because I was concerned. Someone who sees another human being as a jerk, I wonder what that person's like and what he's coming from. To have that sort of a judgment naming of a human being. And I'm glad you said what you did, because I'm not mad at you anymore.
Oh, good. I didn't know you were mad at me in the first place.
Not really. So then what is radar?
Well, radar is clearly an early warning system. It's something that you use on a boat or an airplane to detect what is around you and potential dangers that might be coming your way. So putting them together, jerk radar is the ability to detect a person with these jerky attitudes before they get close enough to actually hurt you.
See, I've learned through the years that my viewers range a whole range of age and intellectual ability and like that. So that's why it seems like I'd ask a question that is sort of dumb.
I think it's an important question to understand the book, actually.
Who is this book written for? Let's hold it up again.
The audience that I had in mind for Jerk Radar is primarily women who have been in an abusive or hurtful relationship. And the main reason I pick women, it's not that all jerks are women, but I mean, excuse me, all jerks are men, and that women are their victims. There's plenty of women who engage in these behaviors. There's you know, gay relationships where one person takes this kind of a role. But most of my experience is with helping women who are escaping from male abusers. And that's where I got most of the information, most of the stories. I do have one male contributor in here. And I've definitely encountered situations where men have been abused by women, both emotionally and sometimes even physically. So it absolutely happens in both directions, but the target audience would be an adult woman who has had a jerk or two in her life and wants to figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen to them again.
Okay. Do you have any summary opinions about, generally speaking, what kind of a characteristics can a woman see in a guy ahead of time to say, hey, this guy is possibly a jerk and I shouldn't get involved with him?
Well, that's, of course, the entirety of the book is written about that. If you want a short answer, you probably should turn to the last chapter in the Jerk Radar quiz, where I kind of go over a short version of kind of 5 points from each area that you can check. But to give you a couple of examples, one of the things, do you mind if I read something from the book?
Go ahead.
There's actually one section here I think that kind of sums it up really well. And this is shared by one of my favorite contributors on the message board. So here we are. This is from BC in Pennsylvania. She was in a 20-year abusive relationship that she's recently escaped. And she's describing the early relationship with her abusive husband. My first date, he brought flowers, took me to dinner, and treated me like a princess. No matter what I did, it was awesome. He bought me a little present every date for the first few months. I thought I had found my prince. He caused me to feel so wonderful about myself, but more wonderful about him. He became my self-esteem. He made me feel so great. He would call me just to tell me he missed me and was thinking about me. He would surprise me with visits and bearing presents for me. He told me that I should be treated like a queen because that is what I deserved. He was the perfect man until we married only a few short months later. He would introduce me to his friends as the perfect girlfriend and say he doesn't know what he did to deserve me. He would tell his friends and family constantly how wonderful I was. In fact, it was a little embarrassing for me. Flowers, candy, jewelry, my favorite author book, surprise trips, everything in those first few months we dated. Yes, he spent a lot of money, but thinking back, how cheaply I sold myself. I remember the first verbal blow I received. I was crushed and wanted to do anything to make him think of me the way he did before. I just wanted him to think of me again in that same way, to think I was wonderful and to love me.
Wow.
You know, it makes me tear up a little bit just hearing her speak. And if you knew the kind of abuse this woman experienced, it was just devastating. It was amazing. She's one of the most amazingly courageous characters that I know. She actually got out of what was essentially a religious cult where all the men believed that they owned the women and that God gave them their wives to do with whatever they wanted. And I can tell you that what they wanted was pretty depraved in a lot of times. So what I want to illustrate here is that this person at the beginning seemed very charming. They seemed almost amazingly too good to be true. And of course, you know, he wasn't. But especially if you're talking about a person who has come from a place where they didn't really feel great about themselves, where their family maybe didn't treat them all that well, or they were lonely when they were kids, or they were picked on in school, you know. And then along comes this guy who treats them so wonderfully. They buy them flowers, candy, they tell them the most wonderful person in the world. It's very easy to see how somebody could fall for this. But that kind of high-level charmingness is actually a warning sign. That person who's going what I call over the top, I call it excessive charm. They're so charming that you just can't believe that somebody would act that way towards you. It's time to stop and take a look there and see what's really going on. Another thing you might notice in there is that they were married only a few months after they got together, which is another real serious warning sign. If you have a person who wants to get you engaged in a relationship really fast, if they go from the first date to I love you within a week or two, they're asking you to move in before the end of the month, you know, then they want to get married, they want to have kids. That kind of intensity is actually the first step towards isolating you. I create this wonderful, intense relationship between us. Nothing else matters but you and me, right? We are meant to be together. And then everything else falls by the wayside. And then when you start wanting to go see your old girlfriend again, it's like, oh, honey, but I had plans for tonight. I wanted us to be together. You know, you are so special to me. I really just need you to spend the night with me. Can't you tell her you'll come another time? Very slowly, step by step, this person gains more and more control of your life. And at some point you look back and you say, how did I get here? But it all starts with that intensity, that desire to have things be so intense and wonderful and beautiful that you don't need anybody else but me. I'm the only person that really is going to be necessary to make your life complete.
So what happened to her?
She got married to this guy and had 2 kids, and they lived in this religious community for years where she was required to go to the pastor every week for lessons, where they would talk to her about how she needed to be subservient to her husband and do all these things that I don't even want to get into the details of how bad it was, but you know, including things like being locked up in the basement and some. Well, I don't want to go any further because it's just too horrible to even talk about.
Did she ever get separate from him?
She has very recently, only within the last year, and she started, the first thing that helped her get out was she started posting on our message board. And in fact, she was very clever that she was expected by her pastor to do certain work. That was part of the deal. And she used his laptop and used that in order to post onto the message board and say, I'm feeling really trapped here. Her son was also a critical part of her getting out. That when he got to be 18, he knew what was going on and he got away and was there to help her when she needed it. But it was a very tremendously intense brainwashing experience for her. And I only heard just yesterday that her husband finally got arrested and is in jail, and she's feeling a big relief right now.
So how much learning do you think she had to get before she realized there was a better life for her than the life that she chose for herself to that point?
Well, I think a couple things had to happen. The first was having her son not be in the home and be outside of the control of this world. It gave her an outside perspective that, and she started to see, okay, he has gotten away. So that was kind of the first piece. I think the second thing was she started seeing her daughter was a teenager, and she was starting to think about her daughter being a part of this community, and she didn't want her daughter to be a part of this community. She wanted to get her out of there. And so then when she reached out to the community, I think what she saw was, number one, that there's a lot of other people that have been through similar kind of things. Number two, that people admired her for her courage. They didn't think that she was stupid or you know, foolish or needed to be controlled. And then finally, I think we were able to talk to her about, that if it's not good for your daughter and you don't want your daughter to be in it, why would it be good for you? You know, why would you be willing to put up with that? And it took her a long, long time to kind of pull that together and say, you know, that's actually right. But she took some tremendous risks. I'd say she risked her life in order to get away from there.
Who talked to her? Well, one of your workers, or you, or somebody else?
It's actually a group of survivors of domestic abuse. And it's just really like a support group online that I ran into a long time ago, just because I was asking a question that I wanted to get a bunch of survivors' answers to. And it was such a cool place that I've been posting there ever since. That was back in about like 2002 or 2003.
How could a viewer go to this site and be a part of what you're talking about?
Well, I don't want to actually give out, and I don't in the book give out this particular website because I don't want them to be inundated with whole bunches of people who are coming to because I post there. I have a website myself, jerkradar.org, which if people want to send me messages, I can talk to them there. And then if it seemed appropriate, I'd be happy to refer them. But if you type in
jerkradar.org, jerkradar.org, Mr. CG person, so we can put that up on the screen.
Great. If you just go to the web and type in, domestic violence discussion board, there's a bunch of communities that are out there that do the same kind of thing. And I think it's so helpful for people who are in the situation to talk to somebody else who is in or has been in the situation, because they usually feel very foolish. They feel stupid. They feel uncertain too. They feel like, well, am I making this up? Am I making too big a deal out of it? Is this how other relationships are? Is it my fault in some way? And it really helps to have somebody else say, you know, I thought the same thing. I thought it was my fault, and here's what I found out, and here's what I did. And my husband said the same things to me. It really helps. It really helps the person to realize that they're not crazy, and that they're not the one with the problem, that this person's actually doing something to them to make them feel bad.
So you got to recognize at my age, I'm not too hot on the new high-tech stuff, but I'm glad that that's available for people who do use the internet and break out of where they're stuck. That's good.
Another local resource that people can and should use is the Portland Women's Crisis Line, which is
the Portland Women's Crisis Line.
Portland Women's Crisis Line, 503-235-5333, and they talk to domestic abuse survivors all the time. You can be totally anonymous and just discuss your situation, talk over your options. They have referrals to shelter programs and provide a similar kind of service that, you know, they're mostly people who've been through it and want to help other people to escape.
So this show is seen all over the country. So you talked about local sources, and say again the broad term that a person can Google and get the kind of contact that we're talking about now.
If you put in domestic abuse discussion board, you should be able to find a community that you can hook up with. Domestic
Abuse Discussion Board.
Correct. And there is a national number here too, which I have in the book that I can share with you as well. I do stress in the book, and I think it's really important, that I talk about things in here. This is what you do early on in a relationship to tell if you're going to get into a bad scene with somebody. There's a lot of things I talk about in here. If you did them when you were already in a relationship where this guy already felt like he owned you and was in control, you could be putting yourself in some serious danger. So I'm not saying not to read the book. I'm saying absolutely you should read the book, because it may help you understand kind of how did I get into this mess. But if you're in that kind of a situation, you're much better calling a domestic violence helpline rather than trying to test him out and see, how he'll handle your being more assertive. So the USA national number for domestic abuse is 1-800-799-SAFE. 799-SAFE. And it's a national domestic abuse hotline, and they will refer you to a domestic abuse organization in your local area.
How can someone buy your book?
You can go to www.jerkradar.org. It is also available at at Powell's.
Powell's Books.
Powell's Books in Portland, if you happen to be a Portlander. You can go to powells.com. You can go to amazon.com, and you can also go to barnesandnoble.com.
Oh, wow, it's all over the place, huh?
Yeah.
How long has it been out?
The book came out on the 6th of April. So just over a month.
Yeah, any indication yet about its sales so far?
You know, I don't know
It's
the
so
sales
early,
numbers.
yeah.
I really don't, but I do know that at one point it made it up to number 24 or 26 on the Kindle list for Amazon. So
Okay.
I know there's at least a couple hundred books in that in that queue. So number 24 sounds pretty good to me.
You betcha.
And in hardback, it made it up to something like 36,000. But I think there's a lot more. I'm sorry, in hard copy. I think there's a lot more hard copy books on the list. So I felt pretty good about that.
Yeah. What's the most important message readers will take away from this book when they read it?
I think probably the most important message is don't sell yourself short. Know what it is you want in a relationship and go after it. If a person does something that makes you feel uncomfortable, you should tell them that it makes you feel uncomfortable. If you want to do something that they don't like, you should go ahead and do it and see how they react to it. You shouldn't be worried about somebody rejecting you because you're yourself. You know what I'm saying? Because you do the things that you do. Let's take the thing we talked about earlier about visiting with your girlfriend. If you've been visiting with your girlfriend on Thursday nights, before you went out with this guy, and he doesn't want you to go visit her on Thursday nights, what's that about, Go visit your girlfriend. If he doesn't like it, if he's going to break up with you because you want to visit your girlfriend on Thursday night, good riddance. Get rid of him, So that's really the point of it, and why I think I chose the title Jerk Radar. It's not, again, that these people are necessarily evil human beings, but when you have a person who sees you as more of a target or a possession, or the relationship as a game where they are trying to win by controlling you, you're putting yourself in danger. And the best way to avoid that is just not to put up with it right at the beginning. And the jerky person is gonna be upset with you. They're gonna call you the B word, and that just tells you who they are. It just tells you that they don't really care about who you are and what you want and what you need. And if you don't set that limit right then, 20 years from now, you may be like poor BC trying to escape from a really bad situation.
And I'm wondering, the personality of a woman in this instance is such that she gets herself involved in that kind of a situation with that kind of a man, and I'm wondering if counseling by an expert counselor would be sufficient to have her decide that she's worth more than she's giving herself credit for now, or do we need some analysis, some psychotherapy?
I think that psychotherapy can be super helpful after the person is able to get away. I think it can be helpful while the person is in the situation, but it really needs to be a counselor who knows and understands domestic abuse dynamics. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the counseling field don't really have the training or background to understand the situation well enough, and sometimes they give really bad advice. Sometimes they will advise that the person get involved, for example, in couples counseling with their partner, which can be tremendously dangerous, because here you are talking together in front of the counselor, and you say something that you don't like about him. He may not say something right there, but boy, you're going to pay for that later. You're going to pay for that later on when you get home. Or the person, if they're smart, isn't going to say what's really going on because they feel unsafe about it, which means the counseling isn't going to take you anywhere at all. So I think you need somebody who really understands domestic abuse to get the person to work out of the situation. Once they're out, I think a more standard counseling approach can be really, really helpful. But again, I think the person needs to have some understanding, experience of trauma, and why people act the way they do. One of the things that I've learned in working on this website that I think is really important is we tend to think of domestic abuse as the hitting part, you know, that some big incident happens, the police are called, and then the person leaves, and they get a restraining order, and then they're okay. And that's not really how it works. There's a tremendous feeling of loss and devastation that generally hits the domestic abuse survivor after they have left. Usually there's an initial feeling of release, of relief, of elation, but then within a couple weeks or a couple months, they can get really, really depressed.
Yes.
Because their life has revolved around this person. Everything that they've done has revolved around this person, and this person is gone. And while that person sometimes was very hurtful to them, that person sometimes was also super nice to them, as you saw in that clip that I read to you. And
stroking has the same caloric value, positive and negative strokes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like little Johnny will pull mom's apron, even though he knows she's going to turn around and smack him because he's hungry for attention to be stroked.
Right, and the abuser unfortunately sets it up so that all reinforcement, positive or negative, only comes from them. And so when the person leaves, they don't have that friend that they used to go out with on Thursday night. They have, you know, lost contact with their mother. Their friends are all frustrated with them because they told them to leave 3 years ago and she didn't listen to them. And so they're very isolated in their lives, and the things that they used to do that they loved, they're out of the habit of doing them. And so they feel usually very depressed. And it takes some time to work through that.
Do you have any data that indicates the success of the kind of interventions you're talking about? Like you have a group of women who were involved with jerks, and what percentage have gotten away from that relationship and continued on with a life where they're not being abused anymore?
I don't have any hard statistics on that. But I can say from my own experience that when a person is in the place where they're reaching out for help, that it's very realistic to help them get away. I would probably say, you know, 2/3 of the women that I encounter on this board eventually manage to get themselves away. And there's another group, you know, of that 1/3 that I don't really know what happened to them.
Sure.
There's some that report that they have gone back, and a lot of times they will go back, you know, several times. I believe that the average is something like 7 times that one will attempt to leave domestic abuse before they're finally able to stay away for good. And partly that's because that charming stuff that we talked about, that it's not that the guy becomes threatening. A lot of times he just goes nice again when they start leaving and tries to make them feel guilty. Oh, you're breaking up the family, give me another chance, you know how much I love you, all that kind of stuff. And most of us aren't able to really understand that a person would be that blatantly manipulative that they would lie about wanting to change their behavior just in order to trick you into going back with them. And that's why the book becomes important. Because I think most of us believe that most people are really, you know, that they're really being genuine with us, and if they're saying that they care about us, that they really do. But there's a group of people where that's not the case.
All right, I'm aware of the time running out, so what will you say to my viewers out there as a final message for the viewers about what's your book and what we've talked about so far? What's a good message for Camera 3?
Well, the thing we didn't really talk about here with the book is Chapter 2, where I talk about mythology and relationships as represented in the media. I think it's really important to look at the messages that you receive from the media, from even fairy tales about what relationships are supposed to be like. That clip that I read from BC, you notice that she talked about being treated like a princess and having met her prince. A lot of people are waiting around for that prince to come to save them from their miserable life. And the jerks know that, and that's what they count on. So don't look for a prince. You look for what you really need in your life, and don't be afraid to offend somebody by saying what you believe or doing what you think is right. If somebody's offended by you being you, you're better off without them.
And be good to yourself.
Exactly.
So they're going to yell at me if I don't stop talking now, so it's time for us to close, so keep your pens and pencils handy because we may want to have something in the credits that you may want to make note of. I got a few public service announcements that I want to tell you about. First one I want to tell you about is to get my show, my local broadcast schedule. Go to my website, www.donbaham.com, and click on present day activities. Then I want to tell you about, to watch my shows on the web, go to my website again and click on favorite links. Next PSA I want to tell you about is the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Sometimes they have opinions or decisions that make me unhappy, but by and large, I'm so grateful for the ACLU for protecting our civil liberties. And now let's see what else we have for you. To get Dr. Don shows broadcast by other stations around the country, ask your local public access station to go to www.pegmedia.org, and that station will then get copies of this show and broadcast from their local station, whatever part of the country it is. And what else do we have for you? Corporate personhood. This is one of my favorites, to end corporate personhood now. Go to www.movetoamend.org. Corporations are way too powerful, and we need to do something about that. So, before we say goodnight, I want to thank my wonderful crew and my director. And I got to thank you for watching. And remember KFC. Not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable. To you too. And you too, and you too, and you too. Thanks again for watching. Good night.